Good evening, everyone. We have opened the virtual classroom. You should be seeing on your screen the best practices for Division One dual match referees. I want to welcome you all to our webinar this evening. I'm going to spend just a very quickly introduce myself, introduce the panel, and then talk to everyone about the options that we have for this evening and how we're going to run this. This, just if you're wondering what was the genesis for this webinar or how it came about, this is the Division One dual match referees webinar. It was recommended that we have something that focused solely on dual match referees by coaches that were on the operating committee for D1. They felt by and large that there was some unevenness across the country for our referees, so that was the genesis for this webinar. And what we did was we sent emails across the country to various coaches and asked them to submit nominations for people. We then also talked to conference administrators and others. And so that was the basis. If you got an email asking you if you were interested in taking this, that's a little bit about how this class came about. For those of you wondering, well, who is this dum-dum talking? My name is Anthony Montero. Just very quickly about me, I chair the ITA National Officials Committee, and I also am the NCAA co-head referee along with Carol Cox for the Division I National Championships, as well as the head referee for the men's team indoor. Unfortunately for all of you, I'm the voice that you're probably going to be hearing talk most of the evening. But there are three other super amazing people who are also teaching this webinar, and they are all from the wonderful state of Tennessee. So we have the Tennessee powerhouse in the house. They are Carol Cox, who I previously had referred to. She, as I mentioned, is the head referee, co-head referee for the Division I championships, as well as the head referee for the women's team indoor. Andrew Rogers is also on the line, who is a NCAA chair umpire and a referee in the SECs, and Richard Rogers, who is the deputy referee at the NCAAs and also is deputy referee at the men's team indoors and at several ITA national championships. So those are, they will be handling your questions that you type in. All of you have attended a webinar before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You have two options. Given that we increase the number of people in the class, it's over 50, we will not be doing very much group discussions because it will quickly become unwieldy. But if you have a question, you have two options. You can click the raise your hand button, but the much better option is to go ahead and type your question in the question box, and that is where you will hear from Richard, Carol, or Andrew, and they are communicating as well together, so they will coordinate how to address the questions as they pop in. There will be a few times only, that we will open up the questions for discussions. But like I said, when we were weighing how to do this and when we opened it up to 50 people for tonight, as you can imagine, a group discussion may get very unwieldy very quickly. So we'll see how it goes and play it by ear on that. So with that, we're going to jump right into it. If you have any questions after this webinar, these are the three people who were responsible for the slides and for creating the curriculum. Darren Potke is another national ITA referee. He also is the head of the NCAA D3 championships. Myself, and then Courtney Potke, who is the ITA officials administrator, and all of our emails are there and you can reach out to us. You can also reach out to Carol, Richard, or Andrew if you know them as well. And we're going to jump right in, but before we do, we want to take our first pop poll because we are interested in what your thoughts are, and this is a poll where there is no correct answer. It's a really simple poll. It just asks, from this list, pick the best quality that you think is the best quality for a Division I dual match referee. And I will launch it. Okay, and 95% of you have voted. That's great. Within 30 seconds, 95% of you voted. That's amazing. So we're only going to hold it open for about 10 or 15 more seconds. There's no participation score for this webinar. So, there's no, if you don't vote, it's not like it's the end of the world or anything like that, like in our certification webinars. So about 5 more seconds, going to hold it open, and very impressive. 96% of you voted within the first 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll, and I am going to share it with all of you. I think there's very, very strong consensus here that 91% of you think that communication skills. Let me just say up front that all of these things on here could be, a very good attribute of a good, or an attribute of a good Division I referee. But I would tend to agree with most of you, the 91%, that among this list, I think that probably the best is communication skills. That would be my best answer to the question. Certainly, the other answers that people gave, knowledge of your crew is going to be critical, and having a positive attitude is also going to be necessary. But I would think on this list, I would tend to agree with the 91% that your communication skills are going to be critical. As we go through this, you're going to find that a lot of what we talk about relates to communication and communication skills. Just kind of a way to start off the class, break the norm. These are things that we asked top Division I referees across the country. These are various things that people talked about that they thought were key to being a top Division I referee. Okay, so one of the things we want to talk about is some of the new rules, because it's going to be critical that we get the new rules right. And if you're not a good Division I, you're not going to be a good Division I referee if you don't know the rules and you don't have the new rules. Further, tying into what the consensus is, 91%, that good communication skills, you're not going to have good communication skills if you don't know what you're communicating, right? If you don't know the rule, you're not going to be able to communicate it well, regardless of how good a communicator you are. So one of the things, reason why we wanted to start with the bathroom break rule is because this is the newest rule in the ITA. It is not in the rule book, unfortunately. It is something that was just passed in January of this year. So we just kind of wanted to cover it and then ask if people had any questions about the new bathroom rule. Couple things to highlight, and all of these slides are available for you, as well as the various handouts that are there in the menu bar. But we really didn't want to have a webinar where we just listed up all the bullet points of the rule. We just kind of wanted to visualize the rule so that we could have a discussion on it. Some key things to remember with this new bathroom break rule is, one, that it is only on the set break, so no longer will you have it on the changeover. Two, there's no longer this concept of travel time, so you won't be adding travel time depending on where you are. And three is that you're going to give the player up to 5 minutes, and it rests with the referee. And to be clear, we think that 95% of the time the referee should default to the 5 minutes. However, we will give some latitude that there might be a few institutions where there are closer bathrooms to all 6 courts, and in those situations, then those institutions, and once again, we think they're going to be few and far in between, you will give less than 5 minutes. You will give 3 or 4 minutes for the extended bathroom break. A couple things I want to say. We've gotten a lot of feedback and questions on, well, what if it's further than 5 minutes? What if it's just one of these places where it's really far away? The one that everyone seems to mention is Auburn, and the other one that comes up is Cary for a conference championship. I will tell you this, I just got back from Australia, where we did at the Australian Open for the first time, we did 2 Division I matches. And as you can imagine, much like at the US Open, the bathrooms are very far away from the courts. We were able to do the bathroom breaks with the 5-minute rule without any problems, both men and women. So I think a lot of times we are creating this issue where the bathroom is, we envision it being so far away when in reality it's not. But having said that, if you are truly in a place where you truly believe you cannot get to the bathroom and back in 5 minutes or less, then you would want to talk with the home institution and with both coaches. And then in those very rare situations, we literally think there are, 5 or less, maybe in the entire country, where those situations you might adopt an time beyond the 5 minutes. But it should not be something where you're going to as a default, because you're concerned, where the coach is saying, no, I think 5 minutes is reasonable. Okay, anyone have any questions on the bathroom break rule? And we might spend a little bit more time on this than anything else because it is a new rule and because, it is not in the rule book. So this is really our first time as a group to be able to discuss this. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I am going to assume that we are good then. Rebel, good. Raise your hand and ask a question. I can't believe you're not going to ask a question. Oh, good, Rebel. Rebel, I am unmuting you. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay. If a player returns after 3 minutes, can they sit on the bench for another 2 minutes?
Great question. Thank you, Rebel. And it also, it was a good test for me because sometimes, you're talking to a screen. You want to make sure that people can actually hear you. Great question, Rebel. No is the short answer to Rebel's question. Remember, it is a bathroom break rule, so that if you are using it, you are using it to go to the bathroom. It is not a rest rule. It is not a recuperation rule or anything like that. So if you were to go to the bathroom and come back with, in 3 minutes, and you had been given 5 minutes, at the time that the player returned back to the court, the chair umpire or the referee should yell time and the match should resume. Because you are not guaranteed 5 minutes, it's up to 5 minutes to use the restroom. Rebel reminds me of another point to bring up. We talked about this towards the end of last year, but I just want to repeat it. You really do need to, so the set break ends. I was just a faculty member at a kickoff weekend this past weekend, and the officials didn't do this, and it caused some problems, so we want to reiterate it. You really do need to have your chair umpires ask the player. So the set break ends, one player comes up to you and says, can I use the restroom? You absolutely can say yes because it's on a set break. And then the chair umpire really does need to ask, is this your extended bathroom break? You need to get an answer from that before the player leaves. Now, some people have argued, no, why don't we just let the player go, and based on when they come back, we'll decide whether it's their one extended or not. The short answer is that's not what the coaches want to do. It's not what the rules committee wants to do. But even more important than that, you need to be able to tell the opponent how long the break is going to be. So before that person leaves, you should be able to then tell the opponent this is going to be just a 2-minute set break, or no, he has elected his bathroom break. This is going to be a up to 5-minute break. And yes, it's the other collateral question we get related to this is that if somebody comes back early, can they bank it? And the answer is no. You've elected your bathroom break. I don't want to say extended. You've elected your bathroom break. You've elected to take the 5 minutes. If you come back in 2.5, you don't get to bank the other 2.5. Okay, just like a medical timeout. Once you elect to use it, it doesn't matter how much time you take. You've used your medical timeout. Sandy Pardon has her hand up. Welcome, Sandy. Sandy, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead, ask your question, Sandy.
Okay, everyone. What is the general consensus if they've used the extended bathroom break? Now they've used their medical timeout, and now it's 2-all, and they go to the bathroom. Let's say in an unauthorized. What is the proper protocol, the process for this?
If it is at an unauthorized time, they're on a strict clock, so they're going to get a time violation, and then they're going to get a point game in default. And you're really being generous giving the time violation, because if they're on a strict clock, you can technically go to point game in default. But I would give the time violation first and then go to point game in default, assuming you haven't given other codes.
Okay, and I agree. I've just heard different stories by different people, so I wanted to hear it from you.
Oh, I'm glad we got the right answer. It must be the right answer, right? Because you and I have it.
You got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Sandy. Vivek, you have a question. Go ahead, Vivek.
Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Vivek.
If it's the second set and they're asking for a bathroom break, isn't it automatically an extended break because there is no other break after that?
You know what, Vivek, that's a great question. And yes, is the short answer. If the second, end of the second set, they split sets, they're not going to have another set break. And if they haven't used their one, then yes, I would just assume that they're using their bathroom break and up to 5 minutes.
Okay.
It's a great question. I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, it makes perfect sense the way you rationalized it.
Hey, Anthony, just to jump in real quick, I was going to throw out a question that got asked. David Harrison had asked, and it might be a good one to bring to the table. He was asking, can a player take two, quote unquote, up to 5 minute bathroom breaks, one at a set break and another as an MTO? And his question also deals with the men's MTO is only 3 minutes typically. So would we limit that second one to 3 minutes, or would we give them the additional time there as well?
It's a great question. I think it was David, right? You said that asked it. If a men's player indicated that they wanted to use their medical timeout to go to the bathroom, they would in fact get 5 minutes. That's the one time that they can use a medical timeout and get more than a 3. Now, keep in mind, they're going to be assessed a point, because under the men, if you take your medical timeout, you're going to be assessed a point. So when they come back after that 5 minutes, they absolutely are going to be assessed a point. They're going to be down a point. But because they're using their medical timeout to go to the bathroom, and assuming at the beginning of the match you already said the bathroom breaks will be 5 minutes, then yes, you are going to give them that time. For the women, the same thing. If they haven't used their one medical timeout, then yes, not at a set break, they can use their one medical timeout to use the restroom.
And I might also just add, subject to time violations when they come back. If they come back
yes, great point, Andrew. Yes, just like as if they had gone on the set break, they'd be subject to consecutive bathroom break time violations, because when you go to if you're going to a bathroom break, either on the authorized bathroom break at the set or using a medical timeout, it's consecutive time violations until you return. Those are the two times when you would be allowed consecutive time violations until you return. Great questions. Okay, we're going to move into our next kind of really significant area. I think things will go a little bit faster here because we did want to spend a little bit of time on the bathroom break rule, because that is the one area that no one has had the opportunity to talk about prior to today. As everyone knows, the Coach's Code of Conduct has been revamped. I want to cover a few things because we definitely, in talking to the faculty members from the National Committee who went to various kickoff sites across the country this past weekend, there are still some confusion on the Coach's Code of Conduct. I want to cover some basics before we go into what is or is not a Coach's Code of Conduct. One, there are still people applying it to the coaches as a group, okay? Remember, now they're individual, they're no longer a unit, they're individual. So a head coach can get a point penalty, a assistant coach could get a point penalty. And technically, I've not seen it yet, but you could even have a third point penalty for the volunteer assistant coach. So remember, they are not a group anymore, so you don't, assess them once 1 point, and then the next time, whatever one of the three were to do something wrong, that person gets ejected. Each one gets the point penalty first. Then the second time, if that individual were to commit the second infraction, is when he or she would be ejected. I'm very happy to report there have been point penalties given this season. We do not, as of today, have an ejection yet of a coach. And I'm also happy to report, and I hope this group will agree, the very strong opinions and consensus that we're seeing from the people who are across the country is that coaches, even some of our more famous ones, are much better behaved with this new system. So that's kind of, where I think there's still some confusion among referees. I wanted to make sure that we talk about that. What's a collateral of that? I think that communication is now going back to the 91%. Communication is so critical now. And you can have great communication skills, but if you don't have a means to communicate, you're still going to be in big trouble. So I reiterate, it is so critical if you can get radios, or if you can invest in something where you can communicate as the referee with all of your chair umpires. If we have to go old school, where you get out of the chair and run to every single chair, or you have whatever system in place, but you need to have a system in place so that Andrew on court 6 outside the stadium gives the coach's code of conduct penalty to the, Vanderbilt assistant coach. Well, that needs to be known by the chair umpires who are inside the stadium on courts 1 and 2. So you really need to think about not just your communication skills, but your means of communication. And frankly, I understand if you're in a smaller school, you may not have the budget or something. But if you're at some of these larger, especially if they have a football or basketball team, you really should be talking with the home coach about getting some radios for your matches. I can tell you from personal experience, I assign and schedule at the University of Southern California, and it was kind of comical. I was kind of scared, to be totally honest. I went into his office and I was like, hey, is there any way we can get some radios, because of these new rules and how important it is that we all communicate when we're out there. The next home match, this just happened last weekend, the next home match, I had like 60 radios in the officials room, and I just kind of was laughing because I was like, okay, we don't need 60 of them, but just shows you like that, sometimes all you got to do is ask politely and professionally, and they are in fact around and available for officials to use. And if you're doing this enough, I mean, I know a lot of us have done this, and I'm not saying you have to, but I know a lot of us have invested in radios, and we have our own radios that we distribute to the crews that we work with. So that's also an option, just depending on how much you're doing it. Okay, just very quickly, what isn't coach's code of conduct? I think we all agree if a coach uses profanity or obscenities to you, they're going to get the coach's code of conduct. We're not going to spend any time on that. Hopefully there's no debate there. Remember that they shouldn't be making references to pay. They shouldn't be making references to your physical or mental capabilities. One thing that I saw as a faculty member this past kickoff weekend, literally saw it, coach yelled across the court, you're really going to make that far side overrule? Really, with those glasses and that head of hair, you're going to make a far sideline overrule? And the official just moved on. The official was newer, I think, got a little intimidated. But that's something, absolutely, that coach is making very direct comments based on your physical characteristics that should have gotten the point penalty. And then remember, the only other one I want to kind of really quickly remind everyone is, remember that a coach can be totally polite, totally professional, the model of good behavior, but he doesn't let an overrule go. If you're, in a match where you're having a 3 or 4 minute delay because a coach is still arguing points with you, that isn't, I would say at 1 minute at the most is when you should definitely, at the very least, be thinking a soft caution to let that coach know that if you, coach, we need to move on. If we don't move on, it's going to be a point penalty. And then if that coach continues, I think you would have to follow up with the penalty. Any questions on the coach's code of conduct for the class, or any discussion points? Okay, remember that even if you don't want to ask your question out loud, Carol, Andrew, and Richard are available to answer your questions. Okay. Okay, which brings us to our second pop poll. We're really trying to test, and this actually happened at my site, so I will talk to you about it afterwards. Hopefully it is launched. So it's 4 minutes after the doubles point. Is the lineup change allowed? I'm kind of paraphrasing the question, but the lineup change 4 minutes after the doubles point allowed? Okay, 30 seconds in and 60% of you have voted, so we're moving along. Okay, 98% of you have voted, so I'm going to close it now and I'm going to share it with all of you. And you can see there's a very strong consensus, majority, 68%, very strong majority, almost 2/3, more than 2/3 actually, say that no, it is too late. Let me tell you what's definitely wrong. Yes, definitely is absolutely wrong under the new rule. They have 2 minutes within the doubles point. So I mean, you know, barring some really exceptional circumstance, you know, yes, definitely is a wrong answer. Also, the 11% that said yes, as long as the trainer has evaluated the player, there are no longer, the rule is very clear. It's 2 minutes from the end of the doubles point. So there's no rule that says if the trainer's treating or anything like that. So those are definitely wrong. The 15% that said not sure depends on the reason for the delay. The reason why I think that's wrong is because the reason for the delay is not really the answer or how I would analyze it. If that said not sure depends if the other coach doesn't object, then I might have let you get away with that being the correct answer. But the reason for the delay, I mean, unless there is some really, really active God that prevented, you know, the coach from getting to where you guys agreed to within the 2 minutes, that is not going to be something that is allowed. So the 68% of you that said no, too late, you're absolutely right. But now let's talk realities. Saying that's the answer, but actually doing that is going to be very difficult, right? You know, I was at, like I said, I mentioned I was at a kickoff site this weekend, and one of the coaches walked up. It wasn't 4 minutes, but it was 2.5, and had just completely forgotten about the new procedure and turning, you know, changing exchange. Thankfully, before the referee had to make a decision, the other coach said, "Oh, it's okay. Let me just see your changes." But you know, then the referee came up to me after the match and was like, "What do I do? Would I really have told him that he couldn't have made any changes?" And the answer is yes. If they were 2.5 minutes after, that's way, you know, that's not something where at, you know, 2 minutes you can see them walking up, or, you know, or even 2 minutes and 10, 15 seconds. You know, the coach even said he forgot about it. So this is a situation, the reason why I just want to highlight it is because we can all say, you know, no, it's too late, but when you're actually put in that position, that is a very difficult call to make. So how, as a good referee, can we make sure we're hopefully not in that position? It wasn't my idea, but I have totally stolen it, and I can tell you I've gotten some positive feedback on it. What I have done, I've only done 3 dual matches in, you know, starting in the, since January of 1st, but I have started announcing. As soon as that doubles point is over, well, first off, let me back up a step. Be proactive at the start of the dual match. I make sure I talk to both coaches and I say, where are we going to meet so that I can witness your lineup exchange 2 minutes after the doubles point. And if they're like, you know, usually they both agree. I'll tell you, it's one of two things. It's either they want to do it on court number 1, or they want to do it on whatever court the doubles point is decided on. Either one is fine with me. If they're like, oh, we'll just, I'm like, I do get a little insistent. No, I want to agree where we are going to meet. So I've done that ahead of time. I've kind of laid the groundwork. I've also done it as where am I going to be so that I can witness your lineup exchange? I really am trying to, show them that it's no longer my responsibility, it's theirs. Then what I have started doing, once the doubles point ends, I'll give it a few seconds. I'm not instantaneous. I let them shake hand, let the team celebrate, maybe 5 or 15 seconds. Then I will announce 2 minutes to the lineup exchange. And then I'm going to announce 1 minute to the lineup exchange. And I just kind of yell it, and I'm standing wherever it was that we agreed that the lineup exchange has happened. I've had 2 different coaches in 4-3 matches, very hotly contested matches, come up to me and say, oh, you know what? I really appreciate you yelling that out, because I'm coaching my team and getting into it and talking about the doubles point, and hearing that I only have 2 minutes, that I only have 1 minute, helps me to, remember I've got to get over there for the lineup exchange. Okay, now you may not like that idea, and that's fine. That is just one way to be proactive to make sure we don't end up in that situation where we're telling a coach, sorry, coach, you're stuck with your singles lineup as originally submitted. Let me close that. Any other questions on this lineup change procedure before we get into medical timeouts and bleeding timeouts? Simon Norman, your hand is raised. Simon, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, on the lineup exchange, so what's the preference as far as when that happens? Because I have some coaches that, might have the book in their hand and they've made the change on paper and they want to exchange with the other guy at the same time. And then I've got other guys that one person will have the book and the other's just coming up and doing it verbally. And then the guy with the book gets a little skeptical that the guy that's doing it verbally is going to, flip his around or something. So, I mean, what is the protocol on that? I mean, do we say you guys should be exchanging the book or what?
I generally tell the coaches, it was taught and the preference was that you would literally exchange lineups, something written, be it the book, be it a copy of your lineup, be it a piece of paper, because the idea is that written, it can be done simultaneously. Right. If I have once had where a coach had nothing and the other coach had his book, and I just looked at the coach that had nothing and said, since you're the one coming without anything written, you've got to go first. And I sold it. Now, what I would have done if he had said, no, he's got to go first, I don't know, but I sold it and all I can tell you there is that at the coaches convention, at the coaches webinars, all of the education and all of the communications from Erica, Tim, and Corey at the ITA to the coaches has been that they should come with something written. Now, if it's 2 good friends and they're just going to do it orally and they trust each other, then obviously I'm not going to be like, hey, where's your writing or anything. So you got to use some good judgment there. But where you have any kind of, well, who's going first, I always tell them, guys, this is why it needs to be in writing so that you can exchange it simultaneously.
So that would be something that you'd establish when you're meeting with the coaches at the beginning and say, hey, if there are changes, we'd like it in writing at the exchange. Great
point, Simon. Great point. Why not be proactive? And when you're in the beginning, the pre-match, the hour before this, why not mention it to both? Hey, hey, coach, remember, it really does work better if you have any changes that you have something in writing so that we can exchange it simultaneously, Yeah. And then there you might get a coach who will tell you, oh, you know what, I've already told him what my change is going to be. I don't care. You know what I mean? So then you'll know that it's not an issue or, and you're right. You have at least fronted it and been proactive. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rebel, good. Go ahead. Ask your question, Rebel.
Just with regard to being proactive on the exchange, when you have your pre-match meeting, tell the coaches, don't come to the exchange after doubles until you've checked with your team. Because once they exchange their singles lineups, they can't then discover an injury and make a change.
It's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah.
The other point I would make is that, and this comes from a conversation today with Erica, this exchange after the doubles is the coaches' exchange. You're there to observe, and if one shows up with nothing and the other has their book and there's some question about who's going first or whatever, I think from a training standpoint, because eventually we want to make sure that they show up with something in writing, that, you know, we don't bail them out, that we tell them, you guys got to sort this out yourself. This is your exchange of lineups, not mine.
Good point. Okay. Al Marshall, I saw your hand up. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, Anthony. Very similar problems or issues, no matter at the pre-match briefings for the kickoff or just before that, the coaches meeting. But the coaches still need to get into their pattern where either one of them, the assistant or the head coach, comes out and does that. And we're training them also. I sort of like your idea of just standing in the middle of the court yelling 2 minutes and 1 minute. I may try that the next time. But both this week, last weekend, I sort of had to, fortunately, it wasn't a long distance to where they were, but I had to go get them, say, you got to change. And all of a sudden they went, oh my goodness, yes, no, I don't have a change. And everything was happy. But they're not used to that themselves yet.
Yeah,
So
you're right. It is definitely a new process. It is definitely a new process. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I will say this, there was some confusion at one of the kickoff sites where the coaches thought they only exchanged the doubles lineup at the beginning, the hour before, and then they did the singles lineup, the 2 minutes after doubles. No, their full lineup is exchanged at the hour before, both doubles and singles. Then it's, do you have any changes to your singles lineup? So don't get confused there either, because some coaches were a little confused with that. They're like, oh, we don't exchange singles until 2 minutes after doubles. No, that is changes to the lineup, which by definition means you already have a lineup that each of you has exchanged. So now it's just any changes, substitutions to that lineup. Okay. I do think that there might be a year of learning on this particular rule and a growing process for us and for the coaches, but I do think ultimately this is going to remove us from many problems, and I'm actually really excited about this new process because as Al and Rebel mentioned, and this removes us from all of the games that had to be played. I literally had coaches telling me, can you go ahead and start scratching on a piece of paper so it looks like I'm giving you a substitution? Because if you don't write anything down while I'm talking to you, then he's watching us and he's going to know that I have no substitutions, etc. And there just started to come all these games that, really the referee had really shouldn't have been involved in, and so I'm do I think we'll probably have a year of some growing pains and some adjustments? Absolutely. But I think 2, 3, 5 years from now we will look back very fondly on this change. At least I hope so. Okay, our next big topic is medical timeouts and bleeding timeouts, and there's still some confusion with officials and some conflating of the two. So one, I think it's important as good communicators, right? Going back to that first slide and the first pop poll, not the first slide. I think it's important, particularly at the beginning of the season, that we take a few minutes and go over medical timeouts and bleeding timeouts with our chair umpires prior to the match. Maybe you don't have to do that in April and May, or hopefully you don't have to do that in April and May, depends on your group of officials. But certainly at the beginning of the season, it couldn't hurt to review it. As the chair of the National Officials, ITA National Officials Committee, I review all of the grievances against officials, and I review all of the complaints we get from either conferences or coaches that an official affected a match, even if it's not a formal grievance. And we still have officials, and when I say that, it's the chair umpire, but then even though it's just the chair umpire, by definition, the referee must also have allowed it because, many times the referee was called to court and nothing changed. So we still have officials who are allowing a player to take two bleeding timeouts for the same injury, for the same bleeding, or who are allowing a player to take a bleeding timeout and then later take a medical timeout for the same bleeding. And so just to kind of remember, one medical timeout per match. If there is a warm-up, i.e. in the fall, then that is their one for the match. Bleeding timeouts, the reason why they get up to 15 minutes, and the reason that's a long time if you think about it, is because they're only going to get one for that bleeding injury. Okay, so if it bleeds again, they need to retire. Now, let's use good judgment. If there was literally a rice, so a player falls and scrapes his knee, and it ends up with a bleeding timeout. It gets wrapped with the gauze and the bandage and everything, okay? And 2 hours and a set later, you see a rice size, drop of blood on the bandage. I would not, from the chair announce, oh, player's bleeding again, he or she must retire. That's a situation if you just see a, rice size, red dot on the bandage that on a changeover you might be able to say, hey, can we just change that bandage, or can we just get that bandage covered anew? But it really does have to be bleeding again. And so I know people are going to ask, well, what's bleeding again? What is it? And you're just going to have to use good judgment there. I don't want to say it has to be substantially bleeding, but it just has to be bleeding again. And if it does bleed again, unfortunately, that player has to retire. And, I will point out that we have had in the NCAA semifinal men's to retire a player because the nose bled again. We've also in the women's semifinals individuals had to retire a player because the injury bled again. So it does happen on very large stages, very high stakes. And, if it is bleeding again, the player has to retire. Once again, I think being proactive with the bleeding timeout and at the changeovers, at the set breaks, allowing, reminding the player that, or the trainer if they're there, that, to see if that bandage can be changed might help to further it down the road. Any questions on medical timeouts or bleeding timeouts, not necessarily about things I've talked about, but anything on either of these topics? Okay. Oh, Dan Dvorak. Dan, give me 1 sec while I unmute you. Dan, you are unmuted. Go ahead, ask your question.
Thanks, Anthony. I just want to clarify. The trainer can redress, the cut, whatever is bleeding during the changeover, and we don't have to stop the match for that.
Correct. Changeover or set break.
Changeover or set break, right? Okay.
Correct. That
just because it comes back, doesn't necessarily require us to end the match.
Correct.
As long as the trainer can still treat it during a set break or changeover, the match.
Right. The problem will be if it starts bleeding and you're not at a changeover or set break.
Okay.
I
understand
even if you're at 15 love, there's nothing that allows you to give him points to get to the set break to then, give him the 2 minutes to treat the bleeding. So, but you're right. If it should start bleeding again at a changeover or set break, he would literally have that time, to try and correct it.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Great question, Dan. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next topic. Endangerment lets, and this could, we could probably spend an hour on this topic as a group. This is the number one issue that coaches think we are inconsistent on as a group across the country. And now having the opportunity to go across the country to various tournaments and to various kickoff weekends, unfortunately, I have to admit they're right. And I think this stems from the referee, to be totally frank. This is something that we as referees need to get better at. As you know, as I think everyone knows, the ITA rule, the endangerment let, is 2 prongs. One, you have to have a ball that rolls on a court that a player does not see, and then 2, it has to be close enough to the player that it is endangering them. Okay, it's 2 prongs. They don't see it, and it's endangerment. We still have referees across the country, including at kickoff weekends, who are instructing their chair umpires, I know what the rule is, but I want you to call let anytime a ball rolls on a court. Okay, and that is 100% incorrect. You cannot do that. I don't care if your home coach is telling you that's what he wants you to do. We need to be consistent on this, and where we then get grievances filed against you, there's going to be issues because, you know, we need this rule enforced. And like I said, this is the #1 complaint we get from coaches, that we don't enforce this rule the way it is written. To the extent that you feel strongly you don't like the rule, I may even be sympathetic to you, but the fact of the matter is that it's not our individual judgments that get to replace the rule. You know, I have told coaches that have gotten mad at me that, well, coach, you know what, then change the rule. But we need to enforce the rule as it's written. So don't be one of those officials that kind of have the great graphic up in the right-hand corner of the slide that is, don't be one of those referees that's telling your officials, I want you to call the lets all the time. Okay. Any thoughts, comments, questions on this topic? Okay, brings us to our 3rd pop poll.
And hey, Anthony, you've got a couple hands up if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or no, you're fine.
Okay, you know what? Yes. Rebel, go ahead, Rebel.
Sure, Anthony. Please talk about the interplay of the procedures on calling rolling ball lets and the new coach's interference rule.
Oh, I was so hoping not to get this question, only because it's a great question, Rebel. It's just complicated. So, you know, as we all know, the rule changed for coaches if they accidentally interfere with play. You know, for example, they start cheering before the point is over. You know, they thought their player had hit a winning shot, but it turns out, you know, the ball was still in play, etc. They will lose the point. If you believe the coach acted intentionally, then you possibly have the issue, like, you know, I'm the coach sitting on the bench and I saw that the opposing player had an overhead and I was trying to intentionally distract him so he would miss the overhead. Well, then you have the option to, not only does the coach lose the point, but then to give the coach's team lose the point. But then you also have the option of giving a coach's code of conduct violation if you believe the coach did it intentionally. And that's the rule. Notice I'm leaving out endangerment lets. Very, very common for a coach to yell let when a ball rolls on a court. I've also had it where I'm in the chair, the ball rolls on the court, I see both players look at the ball and then continue to play. So in my mind, I'm like, that ball is not a let because I saw them both look at it. Well, the coach was maybe looking the other way, he was on another court, and he now walks up. He sees this ball near his player, and he starts to freak out, thinking his player doesn't see it. And he's like, wait, Anthony, let, you got to stop this. And you know, that's to Rebel's scenario, and that happens. I mean, under a technical definition of the rule, you would say, coach, you can't do that, you know, loss of point. I think the better option here, using good judgment, the first time it happens, and I'm assuming the coach is acting in good faith. I'm assuming the coach is not calling the ball let because he's trying to somehow manipulate the point, or to, you know, he thought the point had started to develop in a way that he was going to lose or anything, like, you know, so he's doing it to, you know, I'm assuming the coach in good faith walks up, sees it, and is concerned for his player. I'm going to call and I'm going to admit that I'm not within the 4 corners necessarily of the rule, but I think you're trying to use good judgment, good communication skills, and balance the overall role of a referee. I'm going to call the coach over and I'm going to say, Coach, I understand that you were trying to be helpful there. You're concerned about the ball and the let, but you cannot do that again. Coach, just so you're aware, I saw that ball during the play. I saw both players look at it. They did not call it. If you do that again, Coach, you're going to lose the point. Okay. That's how I would recommend you handle it. I also understand that you might take a stricter view and say, no, I'm going to go straight to the coach losing the point. You know, I understand that argument, and you know, I hear where you're coming from for that position. But I think those are the two options you have. What you can't do is just continually allow the coach to be calling the let, which I often see at various sites and institutions. The coaches, if they want to be able to call the lets, then they need to change the rule so that it gives them the option to call the lets. But the rules as written do not give the coaches the opportunity to call the let. Now, I will tell you, and it was actually probably the best answer I ever got from a coach. I did exactly as I said. I allowed the let to be called. I called the coach over. I said, Coach, I just want to let you know, I know you were trying to help your player and trying to, prevent someone from getting injured, but both of those players saw that ball and they continued to play. You can't call that let. And he looked at me and he goes, I understand where you're coming from, Anthony. He goes, I tell you what, I'm concerned about both players and someone getting hurt. So you know what? If I'm going to do that, Anthony, and I'm going to jump in, I don't mind losing the point, because if I'm jumping in, it's because I feel like it's a necessity for endangerment. And so he was just openly telling me, okay, he's going to keep doing it, but he doesn't mind losing the point. Thankfully, we never had that issue again in the match, because I would have loved to have, seen what happened if I actually had to give him a point. Or assess a point against him. But, I thought that was a fair answer from the coach. He was being honest, and he said, you know what, I don't mind taking the point, taking the hit on the loss of point. I think that, there's an issue here. So I think those are all the interplays that Rebel was alluding to. Hopefully I've addressed it and I'm not too far askew. I don't know if any of our wonderful secondary panelists have any other things to add to that. I'll give them a second to see if they do. If not, I will go to Simon. Not hearing anything from them. So Simon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and it was along similar lines. So there was a ball that came on the court, behind the court, and the chair umpire didn't see it. And then the coach went nuts at the far lines judge and said, well, you should have called it. It was an endangerment to my player. And the chair umpire said, well, they didn't see the ball behind them, which he was obscured because the player was in front of it. But the coach was, and I said, look, the far line umpire is not going to say anything. It's going to be the chair umpire. But he was furious because he said, well, the chair umpire didn't see it. So the far lines judge, because it was right behind his player, should have said something because the ball was, right there.
Yeah, and I think there as the referee, you just have an obligation to educate that coach a little. It is not proper ever for a linesman to call a let, and I would just explain that to him. That is not the role of the linesman. That is not his job. It doesn't matter where the ball is in relation to that. You will never see a linesman calling a let, much like you will never see a linesman. I kind of feel like people give the linesman a hard time when, those very notorious and well-publicized events where the chair umpire made a mistake on the score, and people are like, well, how did the 11 lines people let that happen? It's like, it's not the lines person's job to be keeping the score, or to go up and say, hey, you have the score wrong, I just think that's a point for education, but because I have unfortunately seen some lines people call lets in, Division I college tennis, and we definitely don't want that happening. We do not want the lines people calling lets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great comments. Okay. I'm going to launch this last poll. Hopefully we've already answered it and everyone's going to get this right. But what do you do when a player's nosebleed leads for the second time? Okay, guys, you guys are doing great. We're at 65%, and so far everyone's got it right. 90% and everyone has got it right. I'll keep it open. 92% and everyone's got it right. Oh, did we just get someone who got it right? Very interesting. I have 100% with an answer, but I still have 2% for another. I wonder how that's possible. Okay, I'm going to, that's a fascinating poll. I'm going to close this and I'm going to share it with you. As you can see, 100% said if the bleeding does not stop, the player must retire, but apparently 2% said allow another bleeding timeout. I'm going to go with the 2% as an error, and that all of you got this right because we just spent some time talking about it. Just wanted to kind of re-emphasize and make sure that we all got that point. You're absolutely right. Remember that if the bleeding does not stop, and to the point that was raised by the people who asked the question, we're not at a changeover, we're not at a set break, then that individual has to retire. Hide that. Back to our slides. We've already discussed the lineup changes. The only thing I want to highlight on this slide is the extra time. Make sure that you are not giving too much extra time. I don't have a problem if you're doing, you're allowing the lineup exchange at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I really think once we start to get to 2:30, you've got a problem. So really stress with it. We already talked about this, being proactive, talking to your coaches ahead of time. And then I love, and like I said, it wasn't my idea, but I love the idea of counting it down and just kind of making sure the coaches are staying focused on it and not getting, lost in their pep talk to their team. Okay. Bench players. Really, I don't want to go through the rule again. I thought I would just open it up and see if people have any questions about the bench player rules. I will compliment everyone on this call or everyone on this webinar and the referees across the country, because I think, we all may disagree on various things, but I think everyone will agree that regardless of whether you like the bench player rule or not, regardless of whether you like to enforce it or not, the bench player conduct over the last 2 years, 3 years in college tennis has improved, dramatically. I don't think we have some of the uglier incidents anymore that we used to have. But I just wanted to check in on this topic and see if anyone had any questions or issues that they wanted to talk about related to bench player harassment. Okay. What about crowd control? Another big kind of general topic. Once again, while I don't think we have it as under control as we do with bench player harassment, we are moving in the right direction. We are getting better at our control of spectators and the crowd. Any questions on spectator harassment or what constitutes spectator harassment or issues that you've had? Okay. This is, first off, I want to give a shout out to Courtney Potke for the amazing, she put this slide deck together and she's done all the work to put these webinars together, including polling the coaches and getting the nominations and sending it to all of you. So, I want to give her a shout out. She's amazing. She's our official administrator and she's just done an amazing job. But I want to reiterate that there are forms, okay? And I want to spend a few minutes on this because we've already seen some problems this year with the forms. Post-match code violations, okay? So that is the form you fill out where the match is over. I want to be clear on this. The dual match is over, but a player or a coach does something that merits a code violation or a coach's code of conduct, but you can't give it now because the match is over, okay? That is where you would do for post-match code violations. That is not a form where you've given a carryover, okay? Because we've had some people fill it out for carryover codes that they've given. Okay, if you give a carryover code and it's assessed within the dual match, you don't need to fill out any form for that, okay? This post-match code violation is the ITA wants to track if we have a team that every time they lose the match is smashing their rackets or damaging property or cussing out the referee. The ITA wants to be able to track that. That's the kind of stuff that they're looking at here. And we have seen some patterns and been able to talk with schools and coaches to address those patterns. But if you are able to assess the code within the dual match, then you don't need to fill out the post-match code violations. And perhaps we should have given this a better word. I'll be the first to admit that. Perhaps we should have titled it differently. But really, to be more clear, it should be post-dual match code violations. The idea here is that you have conduct or actions that are egregious that merit a code violation or a coach's code of conduct, but the dual match is over, and therefore there was nowhere for you to assess it. That's what you're going to fill out on that form. The default of a player, I think, is very clear. If you default a player either through point game default, or maybe you had to go immediately to default. If any player is defaulted by the referee, you need to fill out the defaulted player form. Likewise, if you ever have to eject a coach or a player, you are going to fill out the ejection form. Keep in mind, because we've also seen people filling out that form just for the point penalty, you don't need to fill it out for the point penalty, only if you eject a coach. And I'm very happy, as I reported at the beginning of the webinar, to tell you that to my knowledge, as of 3 o'clock today, no coach had been ejected from a match yet. And no, I'm not going to open it up for online betting as to who that coach might be. Okay. If you don't know where those forms are, they can all be found on ZebraWeb. And the only other thing I'm going to add to that, being someone who gets a copy of all the forms, is err on the side of giving more information rather than less. I read some of the forms and I have no idea what happened. So you need to tell us, and you need to be very specific and use the exact language to the best you recall. Don't just say the player used profanity. You need to tell us exactly what the player said that merited the ejection. And the biggest thing is we get things like the player was out of control. Well, that doesn't really, what I consider out of control, what Rebel considers out of control, and what Carol considers out of control might be 3 different things. So you need to give us more facts, like the player was smashing his racket, screaming and yelling at the crowd and at his coach. And when anyone came near him, he said, and you would use blah, blah, bleep, 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 you need to paint the picture so that we have an idea of what exactly happened and why you made the decisions you made. Don't try to do these forms in like 30 seconds or less, or a minute or less. You're not doing yourself a service when you don't have enough information in these forms. Okay, this is the part of the webinar where we have open discussions, but I did want to talk about one other thing that I still am seeing that when we talk about good refereeing. Across the country, I'm still seeing people, and Carol and I talked about this last year in a webinar on refereeing for a dual match. But across the country, we're still seeing referees who assign their chairs by their order of ability. So in other words, they put their best chair on 1, their second best chair on 2, their third best chair on 3, so on. And they do this every single match. I don't think that's a really good idea, personally. I mean, I understand there might be a match where you need to do it that way because that's where the difficult matches are. I'm not saying that a match you might have it that way. But if you are routinely doing that, I would just caution you to perhaps mix it up and try something different, invert it, I mean, I've been doing this 22 years, and by and large, as most of you know, 4-3 dual matches are not decided at the 1 and 2 position. They're usually decided at 3, 4, 5, and 6. I was at a kickoff weekend site just this weekend, and I think it was very clear, that the 6th position was the worst official. And I think coaches pick up on that very quickly, and then, like I said, at least the perception. And then, they're not above using that information to their advantage. So I really think any pattern you have, the most common one I see is my best at 1 and then going down. But any pattern you have, if that's how you're routinely assigning, I think is bad. I think that, you need to mix it up and you need to analyze it and know your crew going all the way back to the first poll, and know where to assign your crew on any given day. You don't necessarily, like I said, your toughest match isn't always going to be at 1. It's just not. And I'm mystified at people who tell me that, oh no, it's always your toughest match is always going to be won, and it's just not what my 22 years have shown out. Any thoughts on assigning, how you assign your matches in terms of which chairs do which? Kimberly Bonk. Kimberly, Kimberly, you are self-muted. You need to unmute your microphone, turn it to green. And there you go, Kimberly. You're good.
Whenever I assign my officials, I try to put a different face on each match. So if they did doubles, I try to put them on a different singles, and I keep a track every week on who did which match, and I try to not put that same official on that player. I think it's fair to the player and it's fair to the official that they each have a new face each week, each match.
That's a great point. And I was shocked at how many times at kickoff weekend I've seen the referee give the same player, a chair umpire, the same player in singles and doubles. Fully understand that sometimes it can't be avoided. There's a last minute lineup change or something like that. But I think you raise great points, Kimberly, about making sure that you're not having the same chair umpire do the same players, and to make sure that you're mixing it up. Great points. Anyone else? Cindy Bain. Cindy, I've unmuted you. Go ahead, Cindy.
What I try to do, if I know I'm going to have a difficult match that they would need overrules, code violations, I will put the officials that I know will do their jobs over some that are more hesitant.
No, that's, yeah, you definitely, going all the way back to the beginning of the webinar, you have to know your people, right? And know their strengths and know their weaknesses, and do some matching up there. That's a great point. Dan, go ahead, Dan, you're unmuted.
Anthony, I've had a coach tell me, or ask me rather, before a match, to be sure that I have somebody strong on, a given position. Let's say he knows that the opponent at number 2 has a history, so he's asked me to put somebody strong on that match. What are your thoughts about, as part of the pre-match, while both coaches are there, just look at them and say, Coach, are there any matches that you think we should be particularly mindful of?
I don't think that's a bad thing. I know a lot of different referees do that. I think, once again, using good judgment, there's some referees, there's some coaches I would never ask that of, because they're going to tell me all 6. But I think as a general rule, being proactive when you're meeting with the coaches. Coach, is there any match that you're concerned about? Is there any match something that, finding the words to say it where you're not saying, is there any match that's going to go to hell? But you're finding a more nicer way to say it. Coach, is there any match that you think needs a strong official? Or maybe I don't like that, because that implies that then you have weak officials. But something like, is there any matches you're concerned about? I don't think that that's a problem. It also gives them a little bit of buy-in, into the process. So I think that's great. It's not something I do. I do know that other officials do that, and I think that's fine. I think that's, I think it's a good thing. It's just not something I personally do. But I will, if a coach, without me bringing it up, if a coach does come up to me and say, hey, I'm really concerned about X or Y match, then I absolutely factor that in, because, you're going to take the coach at face value. And once again, that assumes you don't have a coach that comes up and says 1, 3, 5, and 6. You're like, okay, great, everything but 2. So no, good point, Stan. Great points.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, one other topic I wanted to bring up is what do you do? And I don't change my hypo on me, okay? I'd like to know what you do as the referee. You agree, okay? I want to be clear on this. You agree. Don't say, oh, could have been close calls or anything. What do you do if you see a chair umpire crashing and burning? You know, they're just missing calls, or they've had some really bad overrules, or they just got a rule. What do you do? Any thoughts on that? And don't change the hypo. Like you have watched for a couple games, you know, or 3 or 4 games, and you reach the conclusion, you know, oh my God, this person is crashing and burning. And it could be your best official, because we all have bad days. I'd love to tell you I never crashed and burned, but that's just not true. Or it could be your worst official there, you know. But you've now watched for 3 or 4 games, and you're like, oof, this person is not sharp today. Any thoughts? No one. I stumped you all, huh? Okay, John Bramlett. Thank you, John, for saving me. John, I've unmuted you. Go ahead.
Okay, you have to have courage to do what is right. You got to step up. Some days, somebody may have a problem that you don't know what the problem is, but you have to remove them. You have to change it around. Move them to another match that is not contested. Bring the other chair umpire over. You got to do something. You got to have courage to make a judgment. Thank you.
John, I 100% agree with you. And thank you, John, for stepping up and saying it more eloquently than I did. I just want to hit on John said a lot there in 30 seconds. You know, it is a step up. You've got to step up. That's why I tell people, that's why you're paid the big bucks, the whole $10 more, right? But in other conferences outside of Southern California, it's more than that. But that's why you're paid the big bucks. You know, you've got to make the tough call there, as John said. And you're absolutely right. I think you've got to make a change, whether that's, you know, if in an ideal situation, you absolutely have someone you can either trade him with, or you can trade him or her out. And but worst case scenario, you may have to get in the chair if it's that, you know, if you really sat there 3 or 4 games. And I've only had to do it, thankfully, I've only had to do it once at a national tournament. And you know what? I was really worried. After I did it, you know, I took the person's place. And, you know, when I ran into the person later that evening, in my head, I was like, oh no, here's going to be some confrontation or something. And the person came up and hugged me and just said, you know what? Their grandmother had just died right before the match, and they had just heard the voicemail right as they were getting into the chair. And they didn't think it affected them. And you know, throughout the match, it just started to sink in, and the person just lost it during the match. Was not there emotionally, was there physically, but not mentally, emotionally, or anything. And they were like, thank you, you saved me. So, you know, it doesn't always, John's absolutely right. You have to step up, you have to do the hard decision, but sometimes, you know, the person will actually thank you for it later. I think the kind of standing right by the chair, what are you really doing there? You know, and what message are you sending? You know, I think if you're going to end up standing right by the chair and literally feeding them everything, you may as well just step up and remove them. And I think that's actually a little bit kinder than the message that you've telegraphed if you just stand right by the chair and have taken over the match of, this person doesn't know what they're doing, but I'm not going to have them get out of the chair, and I'm going to just kind of take over from standing over here. Anyone else have any thoughts on this topic, or any other thoughts on what they would do? Okay, well, we are right at an hour and 15 minutes, which I told you was going to be my goal for this. Oh, wait, we do. Harold Chapman. Harold, I'm unmuting you. Harold, you're self-muted, so you got to hit your green mic, and then you can speak. There you go, Harold. Oh, Harold, there you go, Harold.
Yeah, I'm on my daughter's computer. So, that question about removing the chair, you take him to another spot, when you get out to the other spot, that player on that court, say you move the guy from 3 to 5, you switch the umpires, and the guy on number 5, he's going to be upset because now he's seen that this guy was having problems on 3, and when you take take him down there, you got the same issue. So, yeah, I don't think you should take him down to that chair if you're going to replace somebody. Put the new guy on the court you left, and let the referee go down on number 5.
That's a fair solution. You may, for whatever reason, not be able to just totally go without the chair, in which case, yeah, definitely replace them with a chair as far away that hopefully someone that didn't see it. You're right, you wouldn't want to do it on a court right next door, because they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, why are you giving me this guy? But I think you're absolutely right. If you can just replace the chair umpire without, I think John was talking about, in a last ditch scenario, you'd have to replace them with another chair umpire if you had to. But I think it's a very good point you raised. Very good topic. Lee Ward, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Lee.
Anthony, I have a question. I've heard several officials tell me that they work in situations where the referee is actually a chair umpire as well. And I was curious about how that's handled at different venues. What chair do you do as the referee, or how do you position yourself to handle problems? What if you are on one end of the court and a problem occurs on the other end of the court needing the referee? Just a general discussion of how that particular situation is handled.
Great question, Lee. I don't think we can give a standard rule, because it's going to depend on the facility and the facts and circumstances. For example, it's also going to depend, do you have radios and communication? Now, what I used to always give myself number 5 at Southern California, because from number 5 I can see the other 6 courts. Now that we have radios this year, it's been able to free me up to do other numbers, because I don't need to see if someone's having a problem. I have the radio now, and people can communicate me. So I can even give myself number 6, where I'm staring up against a wall beside my court. I have my court and then a wall. I can't see anything because all the other matches are behind me. But with my radio, I can now do that, because if there's any problem behind me, I'm alerted to it and I'm on top of it. So there's going to be some external factors that contribute to that. If you don't have good communication, equipment or abilities, then I do think referees tend to put themselves in areas where they can either see all the matches or easily get to all the matches. They don't tend to put themselves on the end of a bank of 6 where they'd have to interrupt, 5 courts to get to another court. So it just is going to depend on the logistics of your communication and also the logistics of your facility. But those are the main topics that I would keep in mind. Can you communicate easily with all of your chair umpires? Can you get to all of your chair umpires as easily as possible? And then do you have the ability to see them if you don't have instant communication with them? One thing I do think is very important, if you are, because there are some parts of the country and some conferences where it's a 6 chairs and the referee, and then like here in Southern California, it's 6 chairs including the referee. I think it's very important, if you're in the latter 6 chairs including the referee, it's very important that you communicate with the coaches. I always tell them, hey, in case you're looking for me, I'm going to be on number 3 singles, or I'm going to be on number 5 singles. Let them know. I do think be a little proactive there and communicate with them in case they do need to find you. Okay, I really did want to keep this to under 90 minutes, and we are right on our goal. So I am going to open it up.
Say,
there they are. I was
No,
going
you
to
go
open
right
it up
ahead.
to our panelists. No, I was going to open it up to our secondary panelists. So
Well, I was just there was a question going on. We've had some background chatter here about question back on the bathroom breaks and with regards to lateness from the bathroom break and time violations. The hypothetical scenario is a player is late returning from the bathroom during his bathroom break and is issued a time violation warning. Later in the match, the player is late resuming play after a changeover, not going to the restroom, but we've a different scenario. He's late resuming from a changeover. Would you issue an additional time violation warning, or would you go straight to the point penalty in that situation?
Yes, I believe this does cause some discussion among officials. I believe they are two totally separate time violation systems. So if you notice, when I was talking about the time violations, or you may not have noticed, but I always said bathroom break time violation. And that is just how I internally keep them separate. So you have a bathroom break time violation warning, bathroom break time violation point penalty, and that is how I announce it when I am in the chair and there is a bathroom break. When I am in the match, i.e. not at a bathroom break, then I just say time violation warning and time violation point penalty. And they are two totally separate systems. So the first time you have a bathroom break time violation warning, and then a set later when the player is either taking 30 seconds in between points or is slow to get up off it, you would give a time violation warning.
Perfect. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that right there.
If I misspoke, and because that's a very confusing topic, if I misspoke, I apologize because I might have. Andrew, Carol, or Richard, anything else to add as we get ready to sign off here?
And I would just like to add that just remember that when you are giving the time violations being late from the bathroom break, that it is warning followed by point, point, point. And that's why it's different from our regular time violations during a match where it would be warning and then a point, and then you would go into the code. Because remember, during the match on court, you can't have back-to-back time violations.
You're not going to have consecutive without an intervening point being played, right?
Right.
Excellent. Yeah. Mr. Rogers Sr., anything, or are we all good from the Tennessee Powerhouse group?
No, I think we've got it covered.
Okay. Okay. Well, the goal of this webinar wasn't, that you'd walk away and take away, 100 things, but it was maybe that you would, as a referee as an individual, this group, I'm scanning through the attendees, and it's like a who's who of the ITA collegiate community. It's some of our best people across the country. The idea is that, you'll take away one or two things and realize, oh, this is where I could improve. And we all of us, me included, all have areas where we can improve as a referee. And that hopefully, we all become more consistent, because that is the biggest thing that we're striving for, is that I think that is something that is so, I don't want to say unique, but it is so particular to college tennis, because, we do have a team like, UCLA or Vanderbilt or Boston College that will play all across the country in one season. So the idea is that they are being treated the same regardless, so that there's not, the Missouri rules and then the, Ohio rules and then the UCLA rules. We want it to be so that we are all trying to get to the same place of being consistent, using good judgment, and having good communication. If throughout the course of your season, Carol, Richard, Andrew, or I can be of any assistance, please feel free to email us. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Rebel Good, who is on this call, is one of our rules committee liaisons, so he's another great resource. If you can email him, and we certainly, if there's a rule that you think is just not working, please let us know. We want to hear about it. We certainly will acknowledge that we've had rules that have needed to be tweaked because while they sounded great in the classroom, in reality they did not, pan out. So please let any of those individuals know. I know Tim and Erica asked me to thank everyone on this webinar for all that you do for college tennis and for the ITA and the ITA officials, officiating in general. And I also will end by thanking Carol, Richard, and Andrew, who have the much more difficult job of having to type answers and questions. With that, you are free to exit. Carol, Richard, Andrew, and I will stay on a little bit longer to answer any questions that anyone has on any topics, but you are free to leave. The webinar is officially over, and we're just going to stay on and answer any questions either that are lingering in the questions box or if you just want to raise your hand. Kimberly, I've unmuted you. Go ahead, ask your question. You're self-muted again. Oh, wait, hold on. There we go. There you go, Kimberly.
Hi, Anthony. Thank you. I am the referee at USF, and it's kind of an older, I guess, court setup, and they have like this old bathroom. There's only like 2 stalls in each one, and one is like broken down half the time. So the coach said that, she was on the committee for this bathroom break rule and she didn't agree with it. And she's wanting to do reasonable time. So do I have to hold her to this 90-second and the 2 minutes and the extended bathroom break if the other coach is in agreement with it?
I mean, if both coaches are in agreement and they want to use reasonable time, I think I would just politely state, that's not the rule, and I just want to state that I've told you need to be following the rule, but then I would just go with that. But, I would just make it clear that, you said your piece that we should be following the rule, but then, if both coaches are going to go with reasonable time, I don't want you there going, no, we're going to use, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. But I don't want it to, I don't think it will happen but, it certainly can't be and I would try to talk to the coach, coach, it can't be the thing where wherever you disagree with the rule, we opt out of it. But,
right.
But on, pick your battles and, is this where you'd pick your battle? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like if both coaches agreed, fine.
Yeah, because her main concern too is that the restroom facilities are also used by the general public. So they've put up a sign that says if a player's there, then they get priority to use the restroom over the public. So that's kind of her concern is they don't have a locker room there at the varsity courts. So it's just kind of like, in the field, and they have this older restroom. And so she doesn't want a player to be punished, for the 90 seconds if they can't get into the stall.
I understand. And I see your point. I would argue I'd try to do, not argue. What I'd try to do is see if you can get her to agree to a time, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, as opposed to reasonable time. Because I just think that becomes so, kind of ambiguous and, difficult. Granted, I know we all do that in USTA, but still, let's just see if we can, okay, you know what, because of all of these things, maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes is what it is. And then I think I feel I'm losing a little bit less sleep over that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great question.
Oh, thank you for your support. I appreciate it.
No problem. Lee Ward. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Anthony. I have one follow-up question. and that is in a situation where you are the sixth umpire, and there's a situation where one of the umpires has had a highway accident and cannot make the event, make the match. How would you handle that, or do you have any thoughts on that? That you only have yourself as the fifth chair umpire.
You only have yourself as the fifth or the sixth?
You would be the fifth since one could not get there because of the accident.
Got it. Okay, I got it. Okay. Because let me deal with my answer first. You notice how I'm changing your question, then I'll answer your question, Lee.
Thank you.
If you're a chair in if you're a referee in 6 chairs and for some reason one of your chairs can't make it, and things happen, life happens, people have families and injuries and things. I'm not in any way, and people just forget, unfortunately. We do have some flakes, right? We can all name a few. So if that happens, whatever reason, then I definitely think you get in the chair. Don't not have someone in the chair, we've had a referee say, oh no, I never get in the chair, I'm the referee. No, if you end up with just 6 because someone didn't show up, you get in the chair. And I understand your job's more challenging, but it can be done, and it can be done, it's a one-time fix, not your regular thing. Now you are a referee with 5 other officials and 1, 2 don't show up. I've had it where the car that was unfortunately carpooling with 2 officials, got flat tires and they didn't make it. Then you're just going to do the best that you can do, and you're going to try and come up with a scenario. I'll never forget, Carol and I roved at the NCAAs because we had a situation. This is the round of 16, and her and I were roving 4 and 6 because officials had been sent to Atlanta and got stuck in traffic, horrible traffic on the way back. And so we had started a match outdoors. We'd send them to Atlanta to go indoors, and we said, we had a rove. Here we are, round of 16. And you know what? It was the coaches decided they'd rather play than wait for those officials to get there. So, I think communicate with your coaches, have an option. Usually I think it's you as the referee roving 2 courts in your specific scenario, Lee, 2 courts next to each other. Don't say I'll rove 5 and 6 if they're on opposite ends of the, facility. Pick 2 courts that are next to each other. It's usually 4, 6, 3, 5, right? And rove those, and then as soon as one of those finishes, get in the chair on the other one and finish that match in the chair. But I think being proactive, talking to your coaches, letting them know the scenario. It hasn't happened often, 3 or 4 times to me in 20 years. And most coaches have been very supportive because they realize life happens.
Yes.
Now, if it's the 5th time in a row for your dual match, of course that home coach is going to have some strong words for you, and, then you'll cross that bridge. But, the true, unfortunate life, emergency, you just do the best you can.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, with that, are we done with the written questions, Andrew or Richard or Carol?
We're still working.
There's a couple more I'm still working on, but most of them, yes.
Okay, well, we'll wait a few more minutes while you answer those. And Kimberly and Lee, I'm going to lower your hands. If you still have a question, just click on the button again. But I think those were hand raises that I forgot to lower after I answered. Okay, great. Dan, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Dan, you're unmuted.
Thanks for taking my question, Anthony.
No problem.
As the 6th chair umpire at UCLA, do you stay with your match through the entire match, or do you have somebody come and relieve you? Let's say, another position finishes before your match. Do you have that chair umpire come and relieve you so that you can then be an off-court referee and available for the other matches remaining, or do you just stay with that match and deal with anything as it may come up?
That's a great question. Me personally, I don't know if there's a right answer here. Me personally, unless something has happened that I think requires my attention elsewhere, I stay with the match. So unless I've had like an incident that I feel like I need to be present for, like maybe spectator harassment or the coaches were going at it, and so I really needed to be on that court to keep them in line, which is 1 or 2 matches a season. They're not that many often that something like that happens. Unless something like that has happened, I stay on my match. The only time I'll have someone come replace me is if I feel I'm absolutely needed somewhere else in the dual match. Otherwise, I'll just stay on my match and, finish my match.
Thanks very much.
And I seem to have the amazing gift of giving myself the worst match, the longest one. I can do it anytime, doesn't matter. A kid could be on crutches and he'll still go 3 sets if I am doing it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Well, that's all. Oh, just Joe Torres. Joe, you raised your hand. How are you, Joe?
I'm good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good.
Listen, I'm fairly new at the refereeing, so I had a question. I wanted to know, once you get the lineups from the coaches and at the last minute, say right before the double start, the coach wants to, or somebody gets hurt in the warm-up and the coach wants to add another player now because somebody either got hurt or that's what he wants to do a couple minutes before the match because he changed his mind. What is it they're exactly allowed to do? I know that they have their 1, 2, 3 doubles team, and then sometimes they'll have another 2 players and 1 through 6 singles, and then another 7th or 8th singles.
Yeah, if they want to add someone who's listed in their lineup 2 doubles, like do a substitution, that's fine. And maybe you'll use good judgment, and if it's like literally something that happened as they were walking to court, you might give the opposing coach a few extra minutes to analyze that change. But that aside, no. Once they've done their lineup change, if a coach forgot to add a player to his lineup, forgot to have a player listed in his lineup, and now wants to add it, that is technically improper. I mean, they're supposed to list their 7, 8, 9, whatever number of players. So they can't add it, but if they want to do a sub, I'm going to allow that. Now, obviously, for the 2 minutes between singles and doubles, doubles ends 2 minutes before, the 2 minutes after doubles ends into the break, they can do their change, but after that time, they cannot make another change. So, if they come back and say, oh, I need to add this addition, I have this other sub, it's too late because they've already seen the lineup in the changes of their opponent.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then if they do, are able to add them, where can they add the player? Can they go?
It's on their book, and they have a line for 8, 9, 10, and I think it goes. Some of them go up to 12. Okay,
but where? So say the.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Where literally can they add them in the? They have to keep their order. So 12 can't be added above 1. They have to keep them in their order. But as long as they keep them in the order that they're in, so 12 could, if they list an 8 and a 9, 8 and 9 could end up playing 5 and 6. As long as they've pulled people above them, all the people above them.
Okay.
But they're going to have to stay in that ladder. They can't move up a rung or down a rung vis-a-vis anyone else in that ladder.
Okay, so they have to go up the ladder.
Correct. They can go up, yeah. But
okay.
They can't, you can't jump someone so that you listed someone at 8. Well, now he's playing 4 and the person you had at 5 stayed at 5. Because now that they've jumped someone, you can't do that. They have to stay in their order.
Okay, and then if the opposing team objects to it, then they can just file not a grievance, but they can just a protest.
Right. At the best you can say, the best you would say to that coach is, Coach, I don't think you can do that, but that's not my call. That's between you, the opposing coach, and the ITA, or you, the opposing coach, and the conference if it's a conference match.
Okay.
You know, the best you can say is, Coach, I don't think that's allowed, but that's not my call. That's between you and the ITA or you and the conference, if it's a conference match.
Okay, perfect. You answered my question. Thank you, Anthony.
No problem, Joe. Good to talk to you. Okay. How are we doing, typing team?
We're getting close.
Type faster. Come on. Any other questions? Oh, Isabel Snyder. Isabel, you are self-muted. Oh, there you are, Isabel. How are you?
Good. You've had great questions. It's time for a change. So I was wondering about bathroom breaks. If somebody is late and you gave the bathroom break time violation, and then now they're late again from another bathroom break, do you go directly to the point that you already gave the bathroom break time violation warning? Or do they get another bathroom break time violation warning the second time they're late?
So you're saying at the next set break they go to the bathroom, but they're limited to the 2 minutes, right?
Right, and then they're late again. Do you give another bathroom break time violation warning?
I would give another bathroom break time violation warning and then consecutive points until they were back.
Okay, thank you.
That was a hard one. Don't ask that hard questions.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? No, okay.
I think that's everything on our end.
Okay, well then with that, I'm gonna log off, and when I log off, it's gonna disconnect everyone. Just wanna thank everyone once again. Thank Carol, Andrew, and Richard. Wish everyone a great evening and a great season. And please email us if you have any questions throughout the season on a referee issue or hypo. Everyone have a good evening and good night.
You too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, sir.